Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar today and making time in your summer. We are going to be talking about moving to remote and hybrid work on Teams and SharePoint Online. And this is a case study, and we really appreciate the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Manitoba allowing us to share this case study with you today. Before I get into it, or before I pass it over to our presenter today, just want to mention a couple of housekeeping notes. We are aiming to have a recording if it works. We will share a recording out on our YouTube channel and slides as well. We'll definitely have the slides. We will share that in an email, so watch your email and you should get that in the next day or so. Also, just take a moment and see if you can find the Q&A button. That will open a panel on your right-hand side, and you'll be able to ask questions or leave comments throughout. We love the interaction that happens in these webinars, and we will get to as many questions at the end as we can. And with that, I'll hand it over to Dylan, who will be our speaker today.
Okay, thanks very much, Jazz. I'm just going to see if I can get my camera up on screen so you can see me as well as the slides. Or is that something you can share my?
Yes, there we go. I think we have that up
awesome.
And live.
Okay, thanks, Jazz. So hello everyone. Good day, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar. So as Jazz mentioned, we're here to talk about the project that Gravity Union, our firm, has done with the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Manitoba to get them on board with SharePoint Online and Microsoft 365 and Collab Space as well for records management. So we'll start with a couple quick introductions. So I'll say hello and tell you a little bit about myself and Gravity Union, and then we have Sam Lount with us here today as well. He's the Director of IT for the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Manitoba, so he'll say hi as well. And then we'll jump into some background on the project. What was our scope of work? What was the approach that we took? What technologies are involved in terms of the project's core scope and what we are delivering to CPSM. That's the acronym you'll probably hear a few times for College of Physicians and Surgeons of Manitoba, CPSM. And then, with that in mind, with those technologies, I'll talk a bit about how we sort of adapted our approach for an entirely remote work project. So, given the pandemic and everything, we did it 100% remote. So we'll talk about how we leverage the technologies to be successful there. And then kind of, in a bigger picture, what are the success factors for the project? What did we do that really, made things work well? And what are some guiding principles of digital transformation in general when it comes to these kinds of projects? Lastly, what are the outcomes? So, both from the enterprise or the organization's perspective about what the benefits are for them, and also, what's in it for me, on the individual level. And we'll wrap up with some Q&A. So as Jazz mentioned, we have the live event Q&A that you can ask questions in as well. So we'll start with some quick introductions. My name is Dylan Zimmerman, and I was a project manager on this project with Gravity Union. And so a little bit about myself. I've got about 15 years experience in the information management sector. So, sort of working in the domains of, document control, document management, records management, enterprise content management. I've worked with most of the leading enterprise content management solutions that are out there. So of course, Microsoft, SharePoint, Microsoft 365, and Collabware or Collab Space in the cloud. I've also done deployments of OpenText Content Server and IBM FileNet and a couple other of the more niche solutions as well. So certainly had my hands dirty in this space for quite a while, and I'm excited to bring that experience to the table here. And with that, I'll just pass it over to Sam to say hello quickly.
Hi, I'm Sam Lount. I'm the Director of IT at the College of Physicians and Surgeons in Manitoba. I'm a software developer by trade, so that's where I lean in terms of my knowledge set. But really, I'm just here to help answer questions that may come up that happen to land on the CPSM side of what happened. So feel free to ask those when we get there. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Sam. So kind of with our personal introductions, out of the way, I'll just introduce the organizations a little bit, both CPSM and Gravity Union. So the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Manitoba is a provincial regulatory body. And so, they have the public's interest in mind, and they oversee and promote safe and ethical delivery of healthcare services within the province of Manitoba. So, what that really involves is, all the physicians, all the doctors that practice in Manitoba and the facilities in which they work would, apply to become members of the college, and the college would, review their qualifications and make sure that everyone, has the credits that they need to perform their jobs, and, oversees, things like complaints as well, and anything else from like a regulatory perspective over the practice of medicine in Manitoba. And so in the bigger picture in Canada, each province has its own similar college, but they are independent organizations, and so they all work a little bit differently and have unique functions that are tailored to that province's requirements or how that province operates from a healthcare perspective. Then a little bit about Gravity Unions. So we are a digital transformation services and consulting firm. So we've got locations, offices in Vancouver and Calgary, also Toronto and Ottawa out in Ontario, and then in Moncton as well. So we sort of span east to west across Canada, and our clients are geographically diverse as well within Canada. And we work with organizations like a lot of public sector organizations like CPSM, other like municipalities and regional governments and federal governments, and we also have clients in the private sector as well. So we get to do a little bit of everything, and that's what really keeps the job interesting for lots of us, is having so many different and diverse clients. And so we are a Collabware partner, Collabware being a records management application that works with SharePoint. And we're also a Gold Microsoft partner as well. And so one of our areas of partnership with Microsoft is in content services, something that we're quite proud of. This is our really the core of our business, is doing content services and collaboration and all that part of digital transformation. So yeah, we're proud to have that credential in hand. A little bit about this slide kind of speaks to some of the experience that we have in terms of years of combined experience across the team. How many projects we've done, how many Microsoft certifications our team has. So yeah, just a little bit about Gravity Union and sort of what we bring to the table when clients engage us for a project. One of the other things that we're quite proud of is in the last couple of years, we've been named one of the best workplaces by the Great Place to Work organization. So we've had that designation for best workplaces in technology, best workplaces for inclusion, for startups as well, or Great Place to Work certified. And then, as you might be able to tell, one of these banners I made up myself because I was pretty excited about the Stanley Cup that recently wrapped up. So we are not the Stanley Cup champions. We are the Enterprise Content Management champions, however. So that's what we'll focus on today. A little bit of background about the project. So this slide just kind of shows, high level from a project management perspective, scope, schedule, effort and resources. So in terms of our project scope, we kick things off with some strategy and planning to sort of figure out, how we were, going to progress through CPSM as an organization, which departments we were going to address in which order, but also, what is our, our security posture in M365? What's our approach to, managing paper records alongside their electronic counterparts? Certainly paper is a factor for lots of organizations, and that included CPSM as well when we got started with the project. So a lot of strategy and sort of thoughtful planning work before we got into the actual implementation, which is to deploy SharePoint Online and Teams. So that's what we're going to focus on today, as well as to deploy CollabSpace to manage records management, so records retention and eventually to disposition, kind of in the background behind SharePoint. And of course, as part of the project, operational support and developing a file plan or records classification and retention schedule for CPSM as well. So what we're going to focus on today is a lot of the SharePoint and Teams side of things. In terms of the schedule and duration, this project has been going for almost a year now. So we kicked off in August 2020. We took a couple of months for that planning phase, And then we had staggered onboarding or rollout processes for the departments that spanned a couple months each. In terms of efforts, it was about 1,200 hours for Gravity Union, all told, to do this project. And then, what that means for the business. So, it ended up being a couple hours a week for staff in the departments to engage. We did identify power users and, representatives that would spend a little more time if they had the availability and the interest, keep that effort a little bit lighter for the rest of the team. And then, of course, the IT group within CPSM, led by Sam, had, a big stake in the project and were very active in participating in the whole process. In terms of our team composition, so from Gravity Union, we basically had four team members. We had myself as a project manager. We had our business and solutions analyst, whose name was Sophie. She did a lot of the engagement with the business and did a lot of the hard work and legwork on this project. We had a senior architect as well, and then kind of an ECM advisor. And then from CPSM, they had their whole IT team. Their chief operating officer, whose name is Dave, he was instrumental in the project success as well. And we'll talk more about that during the success factor slide. Then we had those reps from each business unit. We had the power users. So just to give you an idea of who was involved. One other thing that I'll mention on this slide is just on the right hand side, we've got this logo. So you'll see this again when we actually show the SharePoint solution. But this was a logo for the SharePoint solution that we ended up having a naming contest with CPSM, and we ended up landing on the docking station, which is a bit of a pun. You can see that in the header of the slide here. So doc is in documents, doc as in doctor, and a docking station, kind of a space station theme. In that this is where you're going to go. This is where you're going to connect to, or dock at, in terms of providing documents and collaborating them with other members of the organization and accessing information and all that kind of good stuff. So I'll talk a bit in this next slide about what our project approach is. So now that you kind of know the scope and so forth, how did we actually get there? So I talked about that planning and preparation phase. So this also includes getting things set up. So doing the installation configuration at that base level of the M365 suite. And then also developing our training plans as well, and doing that core training with the CPSM members of the project team, so that when we start to engage the business, everyone's got that same consistent level of knowledge, and we're taking a consistent approach no matter who you talk to in the project team. We then always at Gravity Union, we always start our projects with some pilot groups. So we identify a couple of groups that are going to go first, and the way that we select that, we want to pick teams that are going to be fairly representative of what we're going to see when we engage the rest of the organization. So we don't want to pick any groups that are overly simple or overly complex. We want something that kind of lands in the middle. We also want to be able to have success early on to really get the momentum going for the project. So we look for groups that there's going to be some quick wins out of what we set up for them in SharePoint. We're going to make their jobs and their lives easier through this, and then that's something we can celebrate and communicate out to the rest of the organization. So we do that 2-month onboarding process, and I have another slide that talks a bit about what that looks like. We do that with a couple of pilot groups. Then we move on to implementation for the rest of the organization. So we kind of get into that rhythm and get rolling, and then we typically engage a couple departments at a time, and we have them a little bit overlapping or staggered. So, for example, when we're kicking off and doing requirements gathering for one group, we're just completing the the go live and the support period for the prior group. So I'll talk a bit about now what our SharePoint rollout process is for Gravity Union. So from a project management perspective, we like to take what we call an Agile hybrid approach. So a bit of a blend of Agile project management philosophies and tools and the traditional waterfall approach. So when we're talking about Agile, what things we leverage from the Agile project management world, we leverage a Kanban board for task management and sort of project status tracking, and I'll show what that looks like a little later in the webinar. We also leverage that iterative and continual improvement philosophy. So, we're never trying to get to 100% right out of the gate. We don't, gather our requirements and then expect to sign off and say, and this is now set in stone, and we're just going to build what we've gathered for requirements. We focus more on working solutions over really heavy documentation. We focus on getting to that kind of 80-20 point, validating that we're on the right track, and then actually getting things built, getting people's hands on the solution so they can start to work with it, start to understand what it really means in their day-to-day. And then, through that, we always identify feedback, we always identify changes that we can make and improvements we can make, and we go ahead and do that. So, we expect to have those changes occurring throughout the project process. We also expect those changes to happen after go live as well. So, in the first weeks or first couple months of using the solution that we build, we totally anticipate that the business is going to have some aha moments when they finally get hands-on. They finally start to work. They say, oh, you know what? I need to make this change, or I need another document library, or I need some new tags applied to these documents to help me search for them. And so we plan for that kind of iterative development and continual improvement. And so that's really what we kind of bring from the Agile world. From the waterfall side of things, our process that we execute is repeatable and consistent. So there is an element of predictability through this. That's something that as Gravity Union, our clients often like to have a bit of a clear picture of what's to come and what order are we going to do things in. And so this diagram here sort of shows at a high level what our SharePoint rollout process looks like. So this is the standard set of steps, going from current state and requirements assessment through to solution design and prototype. That's where we kind of kick off that iterative feedback loop cycle that I talked about, with the Agile methodology. Moving through testing and enhancement. Once we have the site, up and running, ready to go, doing the content migration, get documents into the system before finally going live, entering a support period, and doing retrospective. And then all while that kind of repeatable, consistent process is happening, we are delivering training as well. And so training, we spread out across that implementation process, and we break it into manageable chunks. And we try and align those chunks of learning with tasks or aspects of the process to which that training applies. So our philosophy is that, as we engage each department, we give them some training on a particular thing. So, hey, here's some SharePoint basics, for example, or here's how we migrate content in. And then we want to have people do those things and apply that training as soon as possible after they've received it. So it really helps to consolidate that learning, and people aren't getting, say, a crash course, full day of training, and then waiting 2 months and then getting hands on the solution. And we're all human. By that time we've forgotten everything we had learned prior. So really being thoughtful about the timing and how we break up that training and making sure it's aligned to getting some hands-on time with the solution. That's super critical. So that's just a bit about our rollout process from Gravity Union, and that's one of the key things that allows us to be successful is having this well-defined process that we have refined over many years, and dozens or hundreds of clients and projects that we've done. So I'll talk a bit now about what technologies are involved, both from the project delivery perspective. So what did we deliver to CPSM, as well as what did we leverage from the remote work perspective to make it effective. So I've already mentioned SharePoint Online and Teams being, really core elements of the solution where we're doing our document and records management and collaboration. Certainly the Power Platform was involved as well. So we developed a couple of really cool Power apps and lots of Power Automate workflows as well to make that user experience in SharePoint even more streamlined and really help people in their day-to-day. And then sort of on the back end of things, we have CollabSpace, which performs that records management function. And so our philosophy when we work with these products together, and we have a focus on document management and collaboration and end user experience, and then also a focus on compliance and records management. We're very thoughtful about how we approach those two things, because they are quite different. Your business needs and how you need to structure information for your day-to-day can be quite different from the records management or records classification requirements and how we need to organize those records against the file plan and manage that retention over time. And so our philosophy is always that when we're engaging the business for any given department, we are business focused. So we are designing things in a way that makes sense in that business context, and that the end users are going to think is logical and valuable, and it's going to help them in their day-to-day. And that's really one of our guiding principles, is that these kind of projects, where we're implementing SharePoint or a document management process or whatever, it should actually make people's jobs easier. It shouldn't be an additional task that they have to do, at the end of the day or off the side of the desk to file things. We want to integrate that document management with their actual day-to-day business processes so that they're actually quicker at getting their existing jobs done, plus they've achieved the outcomes that the organization needs to store things in SharePoint and have them managed appropriately from a records management perspective. So with that in mind, we set things up in SharePoint and Teams and Power Platform to best serve the end users, and then we sort of behind the scenes apply that records classification and the records management workflows, leveraging CollabSpace in this case. And so that RM stuff that happens largely behind the scenes. Only certain end users, power users or records management focused individuals would be aware that is happening and have their eyes on it. And lots of the rest of the organization is just doing their jobs and getting their work done. And that compliance bit is automated and happens in the background. So as we go a little bit, I'll talk a little bit more, especially about SharePoint Online and Teams, and I'll show a quick demo as well that'll describe how we aligned those two key components of the M365 platform to be logical and helpful for end users. And one thing that I want to mention as well in terms of what was delivered to CPSM is a key decision point in the project around how we leverage or choose not to leverage M365 groups. And this is something that lots of people have questions about and can be a little bit confusing. So in the SharePoint world, from the SharePoint perspective, we have two options when we create a SharePoint site. We can make it a group connected site, or we can make it a non-group connected site. So by default, if you're in the SharePoint Admin Center, you go to create a team site. By default, it's going to be a group connected site, but you can also select to deploy a non-group connected team site. Communication sites, that other type of template in SharePoint Online, are not group connected by default. But by and large, the majority of what we're creating are team sites, and so the decision comes: do we create a group connected team site, or do we create a non-group connected team site? And really, what's really important to recognize is that when you create a group connected team site, so looking at kind of the diagram on the right side of the page here, you're connecting that SharePoint site to a Microsoft 365 group. And that actually spawns a bunch of other services and tools in the M365 world that are going to be tied to that group. So when you create a group connected site, you're going to get a team for that site. You're going to get a planner board for that site. You're going to get a shared OneNote notebook for that site. You're going to get a shared inbox in Outlook, and there's a handful of other M365 services that you get. So when you create a group connected team site in SharePoint, you're kind of getting the full meal deal in terms of M365, which, in a lot of cases, that's great. That's, a lot of powerful tools. That's a lot of benefit. But there might also be cases where we don't need those things for a particular site. And when we think about how we architect sites in relation to any given business unit, we look at that unit as a whole. So, here is a business function that this group performs. They're going to have a certain set of needs, and, they are a team. We're going to want to have a group connected site for them, and they're going to want to leverage some of these parts of the M365 tool set. But there might be other reasons why we actually create multiple SharePoint sites for that group to, split up content, due to content volumes or to help manage security. There's a bunch of different reasons why we would architect things to have multiple sites. And so you don't necessarily need to make every site you create a group connected site. That would give you, multiple different teams, multiple different planner boards and OneNote notebooks and inboxes and so forth. So, you need to be thoughtful about, what do you need and in what are your use cases or scenarios for leveraging each of these great tools in the M365 world, and then making sure that we're managing the potential for a sprawl of those kind of things. So one of the challenges in modern SharePoint Online is that sprawl, especially relevant in regards to teams. And so that one of the things that triggers that potential sprawl is having group connected sites. So all that to say, there are some decisions to be made before we just go start creating SharePoint sites left, right, and center. We want to be thoughtful about whether or not they are group connected and really understand what it means when a site is group connected. So with that in mind, I'm going to talk now a bit about some of the technologies that we leveraged, both within the M365 suite and outside of it, that allowed us to be successful. So we used Microsoft Planner, and that's one of the things I'm going to show in a brief demo here. show our planner Kanban board, and how we leverage that for project management, for task tracking and assignments and so forth, and real transparency into what was going on in the project. Another tool that we used is called Mural. So Mural is like it's sort of a web-based whiteboard, or flip chart, if you will. So I personally, I'm used to doing a lot of our client projects in person, and I go to a client's office, and I really leverage the physical tools in the room. So I like using the whiteboard. I bring a flip chart. I have sticky notes, and really get people up out of their seats and active in the session. And so when we're doing things remotely over Teams, and everyone is either working from home or working from their individual desk, that becomes a lot more challenging. We don't have that face-to-face in-person element, and so that's where some of these tools like Mural, to sort of give us that that sticky note and flip chart and whiteboard experience can really help. Likewise with using Teams as well. So one sort of ground rule that we typically have with our projects is that everyone has their camera on for a Teams meeting. And it might seem trivial, but it actually makes a significant difference in how we are able to engage with each other during that meeting. Just being able to see someone else's face, read their their expressions and their body language a little bit, it drives a much more meaningful connection, and really facilitates communication at a much more effective and higher level than it does just to be on the phone together. So that's one of the things that we did pretty consistently that really I think did help us out throughout. A couple other tools that I'll talk about briefly. Xmind, we use that for a process we call mind mapping. I have a slide for that. And then of course we use SharePoint. We eat our own dog food. We use SharePoint for managing our project documents as well, collaborating on those things, sharing them for review, giving stakeholders access, all that kind of stuff. So I'll talk a bit more about those tools and show some examples. So we talked earlier about the Agile project management methodology. And so one of the key tools we use in Agile project management is a Kanban board. So a Kanban board, it's something that is often leveraged in software development, where we have the concept of having sprints, and we have this task board, and we have a Scrum methodology. And the Kanban board actually dates back to Toyota in the 1940s. One of their engineers in their production line came up with this concept as a way to sort of visually track our work and our tasks. So some of the benefits of using a Kanban board are that you kind of have all the work laid out in front of you. So at a glance, you can see how much work do we have to do. And typically, you have kind of columns within this board, and you have a backlog at the far left. It's where you sort of stack all the to-dos, and then we have some kind of work status-based columns that we progress things through. So maybe we're drafting and we're building, then we're reviewing and we're editing, and we're finally sending for approval, and then signing off or completing things. And so it's great to be able to see all those tasks visually, making sure nothing falls through the cracks or is forgotten about. It also provides a lot of transparency to our project stakeholders. So in the in-person world, like I have in the photo here, this is something we've done at other clients in the past, where we actually have this up on the wall. People can walk by our project area, have a look at what we're doing, what's the status of my particular group, or if I'm a project sponsor, I can get a sense for what's in flight now and what's coming up and what's already completed. So it really makes that all transparent. It also empowers the team to be able to get things started on their own. So, and this is especially important with larger project teams. You might need something to do if you're a project team member. Maybe the project manager is in a meeting or off that day. So when we have this kind of a Kanban board, you can go to the board. You can see what might be in your job stream in the to-do list, as an example, and pick something and start to work on it. So it really does help to progress the pace at which we complete tasks, provide that visibility and that tracking throughout from start to finish. And just having it tactile and laid out in this kind of manner is quite helpful. But I've been talking about how we do that in person with paper and stickies on the wall. So how do we do that in the digital world in a remote project? So this is where Microsoft Planner comes in and provides that value. So kind of similar to what you see here in the picture with all the sticky notes. Planner, it provides you with a Kanban board or a task board based layout that you can totally configure to kind of meet your needs. So likewise that we saw on the paper board, you're likely going to have a backlog of activities in the far left, and then some status-based columns as we move to the right. And so you can create these task cards. You can populate them with checklists. I'll show a bit of this in a demo in a few minutes. You can assign tasks and track dates. So kind of everything you need to know from the task management perspective in a project, you can do with Planner. So yeah, I mentioned a few of these things. We got activity status, those task cards, those due dates, and those assignments. The other cool thing about the assignments feature is that this out of the box will integrate with Outlook, and it will send email reminders. So if I have assigned Sophie here with a task, for example, it'll send her a note, say, hey, you've been assigned a task. So she'll get an email notification about that. Likewise, when that task is coming up to be due or is overdue, it'll send reminders automatically as well. So it's one of the things that kind of crosses into a couple different tools within M365, and really helps to keep things on track and keep us working. I mentioned already about that face-to-face, the value of face-to-face in Teams, sharing our screen to go through that. So that's how we collaborated. All of our project meetings in this project were held via Teams, and everyone joined via Teams. I mentioned we stored all of our own documents into SharePoint. We distributed links to things for review as opposed to copies, so we're not attaching documents to emails. I'm putting it in SharePoint. I'm making sure that people who need access have access, and then I'm sending out a link to that document. And so, through that, we get all the comments from people compiled into one document. I don't have to then receive 20 emails back with marked up copies and try and merge them together. And it just makes that collaboration process and review and approval process a whole lot easier. One of the other tools I mentioned a little earlier is Mural. So there's two key things we use Mural for. It does give you that kind of that flip chart or that post-it note kind of capability. So one thing that we use it for is card sorting. What card sorting is, this is a kind of a cool part, one of the more fun and engaging parts of the Gravity Union process. And when we're doing card sorting, we tend to, by this time we've done some discovery to understand what types of documents that business unit works with, and we've written all those things down onto cards. And so what we do to this card sorting session, we come in person, we'd come into a room, we'd lay all the cards on the table, we try and sort of clear our mind of the thought patterns or ways we've thought about organizing this before, or the ways that we're used to doing it based on just the way it's always been done. And we start to resort or group those cards into logical categories. Start to define, hey, what are these categories called that we're kind of, bringing documents into, and really what we're doing through that, and what the business is doing through that, our stakeholders, is they're designing their own SharePoint site. So it's kind of an abstract way to just focus on the content, focus on logic, what makes sense, how would I logically navigate all these different things, and arrange the cards on the table. And so it's great to do that in person, but we're able to do that with Mural as well. And have those cards represented in a digital format, have our table digitally. We can create labels, we can create categories, we can type out cards. It actually, in some senses, it can be a lot more efficient and faster than manual card sort too. Not sure about anyone else on the line, but I am a faster typer than I am a handwriter, so it allows us to kind of leverage that. So once that card sort is completed, another tool that we use for review and feedback is called Xmind. So Xmind is it's kind of like Visio. It's a visual application that lets you kind of lay out those kind of relationships or hierarchies. So what we do in terms of that card sort, if we were doing it in picture, we would take a snapshot of the table. In the digital world, we have that for reference anytime we need it. And then we start to translate that into SharePoint language, and we create this mind map. So this mind map, you can look at it like an architectural document or a blueprint that represents the structure, the content and structure within that SharePoint site. And this is where we start to layer in a bit of SharePoint terminology as well. So whereas in the card sort, we're talking just totally abstract, we're putting things into groups. When we get to the mind map phase, we're starting to think, okay, what's going to be a site, and what's going to be a document library or a list or a document set? What are our columns of metadata going to be? And so we start to make that translation into the SharePoint terminology and the SharePoint language. And this is also, as I mentioned, kind of with our training approach, by this time, our end users will have received a bit of training on, SharePoint 101. So, they understand what sites and libraries and lists are, and, site columns and all the different elements of SharePoint that help us to manage our information. So, by the time we get to this mind map review, we've just given that training, and the mind map then makes sense, and we can start to understand and really make sure that we're all singing from the same song sheet, as it were, as we review and iterate that project, that site structure. Some of the success factors and guiding principles. That's what I'm going to talk about next. This is also where I'm going to, quit sharing PowerPoint for a minute, and we're going to jump in and have a look at SharePoint and Teams, as well as I'm going to show the planner board that we used as well and talk a bit about how that works. So, when I think about, what allowed us to be successful in this project, and I just want to comment that, this project we've done with CPSM, I think, for me personally, was probably the most successful project that I've ever been involved in and had the privilege to manage. We had truly happy stakeholders. The organization was highly engaged, and I really think the value that CPSM gets out of this project is significant. In my 15 years of experience, some projects have gone really well, some have gone less well, but this is certainly the cream of the crop from my perspective in terms of, really delivering value, ensuring the organization is getting, the full return on investment and benefit out of this project that they were hoping to get and expecting to get when they engaged Scrap the Union. And so some of the things that allowed us to really be successful, three big things come to mind. One being user experience. So, in SharePoint, what we kind of learned through this is that, it's the little things that really make a solution shine. So Sophie, our lead, BA and solution analyst on this project, she's also very handy with Photoshop, and she's a creative, design kind of thinker. And so she created a bespoke icon or a logo for each group, just on her own accord, and got that posted in the site. So you see a couple of them up here in the top right. A couple examples of what Sophie had created, and seems small, right? Seems trivial that you create a small logo to put in the site, but it's those little things that really make the solution shine and really put some polish on it. It helps to for navigation. You understand where you are by virtue of that image. It also can develop a sense of kind of pride and ownership over the site. Hey, this is our site. This is our own custom logo that we had built through the project. So just it's little things like that that really make the solution stand out. The other thing that I'm going to talk about and show in the demo is how we align teams with SharePoint. So this is a huge thing from my perspective in the M365 world, and a question we get all the time is, do I store documents in SharePoint, or what do I store in Teams? Do I store documents in Teams? And what a lot of people don't realize is that Teams actually is SharePoint. So when you're storing documents in Teams in the File tab, for example, you're actually storing that document in a SharePoint site that sits behind that team, and I'll show how that works in my brief demo in a minute. So making sure Teams and SharePoint are aligned, super important to reduce confusion and create that really cohesive user experience. The other thing that was hugely instrumental and critical in our success was the active and visible sponsorship of our project sponsors. So Sam being one, being our IT sponsor, and then Dave as well. Dave was the COO, Chief Operating Officer of CPSM, and so Dave's and Sam's active and visible support for the project, talking the talk and walking the walk, making the rounds at CPSM, talking to our stakeholders, making sure they were tightly engaged, with other leaders in the business who we were working with at that time, was extremely important and critical to our success. One other credential that I've got under my belt is change management certification, and I always think back to when I got my original certification and did the program and the courses to get that, and so the organization that was facilitating that training had a slide to start things off, and so from a change management perspective, the question on the slide was, what is the #1 contributor to project success from a change management perspective? And they do these studies every couple of years, and so they had maybe 20 years of history there. And every single year that they'd done the study, the #1 factor was active and visible sponsorship. So having those top executives, those leaders, really engaged and championing the solution and championing the project is really, really important and really valuable. I can't stress that enough. And so hats off to Sam and to Dave, for their role in doing that. That's really what helped us gain our momentum and keep things rolling as we engage different areas of the business. The other thing that was super important, and I think CPSM did really well, was proactively creating a new role to manage SharePoint. So this is often a challenge that that our clients have, is in a world where we're doing things in paper, or maybe we're not proactively managing documents very much at all. There's not going to be a role. There's not going to be a SharePoint person, or there's not necessarily going to be a records management person on staff. And so when we come and we deliver these projects, we're doing a huge amount of work, and there's a very large and significant output of that to manage and sustain over time. And so that takes people, that takes skills. And so identifying what that role looks like, what are the skills that role needs to have, and proactively, going through the steps to, get HR to actually formally, create this position, post it, have people apply for it, and hire that person into that role. Doing that during the project is extremely helpful, because then by the time the project is done, we don't have a gap, right? There's not a time, when the project team and the consultant has departed, but we don't have our operations person yet, and there's this big gap, and who do we transfer knowledge to from the Gravity Union perspective? So identifying that and jumping on that early, getting that position created, getting that person on board, and giving as much time as possible for us to work with them hand in hand and do knowledge transfer throughout project execution. Super, super important to enabling that sustainment and operations of SharePoint long term. And ultimately our goal at Gravity Union is to make sure that once the project's done, we aren't needed any longer. We want our clients to be self-sufficient, to be able to manage things on their own. And so, setting them up for success in terms of operational transition, having that role identified and filled is super important. And that's something that CPSM was able to do in flight of the project. The other thing which I talked about already is that, that iterative approach, not ever trying to get it perfect right out of the gate, that 80-20 rule and going through continual improvement cycles, also super important. So I'm going to start to talk more about how Teams and SharePoint relate, and this is where I'm going to jump into a quick demo. So as I mentioned earlier, one thing to keep in mind is that from a document perspective, Teams is SharePoint. So when we're going into Teams and we're putting things into the Files tab, or we're working with documents in Teams, we're actually working with a SharePoint site, and Teams is just the interface we're using to access that. And so with that kind of concept in mind, we want to create a consistent user experience, whether or not a user has gone into SharePoint, via their web browser, or they've gone into Teams. We want them to kind of see the same thing, have the same experience, and reduce confusion. And make it clear that when you put something into Teams, yeah, you can go find it in SharePoint later, and vice versa. And so one of the ways that we approach that is by looking at that left-hand navigation menu. So you see an example of a SharePoint site here on the left, and in this green box, we've got our navigation menu. This is all our libraries and lists and so forth in SharePoint. We went into Teams and we added tabs to add a link to each of those libraries across the top here. So your navigation menu from the SharePoint site on the left here is then represented across the top of Teams and is consistent. So you're going to see the same menu. It's laid out horizontally in one and vertically in the other, but that menu is consistent, and your navigation experience is going to be consistent. And in general, we avoid using the Files tab in Teams. And to sort of show why, this is where I'll start this brief demo. So that Files tab within Teams is connected to the out-of-the-box documents library within any given site. So by way of example, I'm just going to navigate to one of the department sites that we have for CPSM, and just have a look at their homepage and their navigation menu here on the left. So this is for the reception group at CPSM. This is their site, and so on the left-hand side here, they've got their site navigation, all their libraries and lists and so forth, and a bunch of other content on the homepage. They had some training things posted. They have some quick links. They have the calendar and recent documents and weather and so forth. So some sort of engaging things on that homepage. And when we go into Teams, I'm going to do Teams through the web browser here, but you could also do it through the Teams application. If I go into Teams, you'll notice I see pretty much the same thing. So when I go to this team here, so you see on the left, this is the reception team. I go to the Home tab in this team, and I get that same layout as I saw in SharePoint. So again, when I arrive, I get a consistent user experience. Also across the top here, I've got all of those menu items, and it sort of runs off into this list here. All the same menu items across the top that I had on the left-hand side in SharePoint. So, whether I'm going into Teams or I'm going into SharePoint, I'm having a consistent navigation experience, and it's clear to me where I'm putting documents and where I actually am working in that cohesive solution. Now, the Files tab, by contrast, this is not something that we can remove from Teams. It's there. And when I click into the Files tab, it goes into a folder that Teams creates or SharePoint creates automatically called General within the generic Documents library. So a couple ways that that's problematic is when we're thinking about things from a document and records classification and records management perspective, we don't like the word general. Typically, that can become like a dumping ground. It doesn't really tell you what's supposed to go in here and what you would expect to find in this location. So that's kind of problematic from the get-go. Another thing that we do typically, we create a bespoke library with content types and with a structure that is going to meet a particular business need for a particular type of content. So we often don't use the documents library, the out-of-the-box documents library in a SharePoint site when we do our deployment. So it's often hidden from the navigation menu. We tend not to delete it, for technical reasons. You don't typically want to delete things that are kind of out of the box, part of that standard template. That could create problems down the road, but it's not something that we use. And so if a user goes and starts to put things into this Files tab, they're putting it into a folder that's called General. This location might not be classified as per that records file plan. So it might not be something that from a records management perspective we're aware of and we're managing and tracking and retaining over time. So it kind of becomes an uncontrolled area. And so this really comes down to training. We can't remove that Files tab, but we can train around it. And so you notice for this group, there's nothing in that area. That training's been effective. People are not leveraging that part of Teams. They are, however, going through these different menu items in different parts of the site and accessing and storing their documents through that same way that they would do it in SharePoint. So one important thing I wanted to show is that relationship between SharePoint and Teams and how we're really talking about the same thing. The other thing that I want to show quickly is our Microsoft Planner Kanban board. So this Kanban board is something that we use to manage all of our tasks in the project. And so if I need to add a task, for example, I can click add a task. I can give it a quick name. I can add that, and then I can open up that card and I can start to add more information. So I open up this card, I can assign a user to it. So let's say I want to assign Sophie. She was our really key person on the project. She had a lot of assignments. I can add some labels to that as well. So let me just open up this one here. I can add labels to that as well. So if you want to make different categories of tasks, things that are of high risk, or things that have an issue attached to them, or there's a bunch of different colors and tags out of the box that you can use to help to organize those things. And so I can also then filter on them later. It's kind of like adding a piece of metadata to that task card. We can also define whether or not it's in progress, what the priority is, medium, low, urgent. I can assign start dates and due dates, and I can create a checklist of items that I can actively manage and check things off the list as we go. So at a glance, anyone can come to the Kanban board, anyone in the project can come to the Kanban board. They can see who's working on what the status of those things are. And again, like I mentioned, we can facilitate those email notifications about when you have an assignment that's been given to you or when something is due. I can also sort and filter by any of those criteria. So I can look at what is already late or maybe is due this week or next week. I can sort things by individual. Hey, let's look at the things that Dylan has on his plate. Any of those labels that I've assigned, I can filter by that. So it gives us kind of quite a dynamic and flexible experience in terms of navigating the project plan and knowing and understanding what's going on in the project at any given time. So this is something that we brought up for every one of we have weekly project team meetings. We would bring up the Kanban board. We review the tasks that were we had in progress today, and this really kept us on the same page and provided that quick reference point. So I'm going to jump quickly now back to to the slide. Just a couple slides left, and then we'll leave a few minutes to answer questions as well. So I just want to talk about things at a higher level when we're talking about digital transformation. It's a big shift in the way that we work. Going from paper-based or manual processes to a digital, streamlined thing, it's huge. And so, through that, it's more than just the technology. We're not just changing technologies. We're actually changing the culture. We're trying to drive changes in end user behavior. And ultimately, that's gonna bring about the business value. So if we don't change our behaviors, or think about change the way that we think about how we work, we're not gonna get the value out of the solution. And so some of those key things that we think about in terms of changing how we think about things, moving from a closed to an open by design concept. So what we always promote is that by default, we aren't locking things down and then sharing them as needed. We're actually starting with things open by design, and then only securing them where we do have those particular security or access requirements that we need to be mindful of. Certainly that comes up, and that's a valid thing. But we want to start with open by default and then close it down by exception. And so through that, we're starting to put trust in the organization and trust in our coworkers that people if they have access to go edit one of my documents, they're not just going to go start editing it. And it's a common concern that people have, is, well, how do I keep this private? How do I make sure that people keep their hands off my stuff, sort of thing. But what we find in our experience is that doesn't actually ever pose an issue. People are busy, right? They don't have time to be going out of their way and mucking with each other's documents just for the heck of it. So it's a concern. It's a natural human thing that we all think about, but it's in reality, it's not something that we see being problematic with organizations. So making it more accessible, sharing things, trying to break down those silos, not reinventing the wheel, because we can actually access and find the different things that we, maybe someone else has made this document before and I can leverage that as a template. Those are a bunch of the ways that we sort of shift our thinking about that, and provides that better user experience. And ultimately, that's where you start to realize the benefits of the solution. The last slide that we've got here before questions. So some of the outcomes that we seek to get in this fun diagram. I'll focus on a couple of them. We want to make sure that things are oriented to the business needs. So like I mentioned, keeping the business perspective and how the business sees things front and center in SharePoint is super important, because ultimately that's, if you put it in the context of the end user and how they think about it, that's what's going to enable them to actually find things a lot easier. So, those kind of search patterns and, the search templates that we set up to be able to easily access and sort and filter documents, really oriented around that end user experience. And allowing people to be more productive and get things they need quicker. And by doing that, people actually start to use the system. So the more adoption that we have, you're going to wind up with what we all want to get out of the end of the day, which is a single source of truth for our documents and records and information. Having that single source of truth will reduce our risk, gives us better control and understanding of the information that we have as an organization. And so these are a lot of the enterprise benefits that we get when everyone is in SharePoint and using it happily. But the other question we get is, what's in it for me? What motivates any individual to do this, or any given department? And so, one of our goals, like I mentioned, is it's going to make your day-to-day jobs easier. So that's, that's a win for you right there. But another thing that we often encourage is that this process that we're going to go through, so each department, we're engaging them for about 2 months. And during those 2 months, we're making a big shift, we're making a big change. And so it's a chance to piggyback on that and maybe make some changes in your group, that you've been wanting to get to for a long time and haven't had the opportunity. So, we see lots of our clients, take advantage of our SharePoint rollout project to actually change their business processes and redefine how they do things. Because we're going through a change anyways. If we're going from the paper world to the electronic world, things are going to change for us. So why not leverage the opportunity to actually streamline the business process itself and actually make that part of the job easier as well. And what we typically see is when groups recognize this and seize that opportunity, those are the groups that get the highest value out of SharePoint and the highest value out of the project and are the happiest stakeholders at the end of the day, because they, not only has the project done something, good for them, but they've done something good for themselves along the way. And it was easier because we had an opportunity to make the change already right in front of us. So that's what we always encourage is, like get on board with this opportunity to change things and think about what you want to get out of this for you in your seat or for your team and those people around you, and let's make it happen. So we've got 5 minutes left here for Q&A. So you can ask questions through that live event Q&A panel. So please feel free to do that if you like, and we'll be happy to address that.
Excellent. Yes, so feel free to add some questions. I just had a couple questions here, Dylan, so I'll jump in with one. What advice or what kind of things can clients or project sponsors do to help a project like this?
Okay, great. So yeah, like I talked about, being active and visible and really promoting the project and carrying that message to the organization. So, one thing that we always want sponsors, project sponsors to do is actually to form a coalition of sponsorship with other leaders in the organization. So, often when we're working with clients on these kind of projects, we're working with IT primarily. IT is going to own SharePoint, they're going to support it, they're sponsoring the project. But IT is not doing this project for fun. They're doing it because they have business customers, they have their own internal customers in the organization that need what is being delivered. And those groups have leaders that can influence both people's buy into the project and the direction the project goes. So if the project sponsor, whether that person is in IT or whatever role they're in, if they reach out and engage other leaders in the business and form that coalition of sponsorship, get other champions at a senior level in the organization on board, that is hugely beneficial. And often that sort of forms into a steering committee for the project at the executive level. So it gives a place for the project to bring key decisions to. We need to decide on something. Really, most of the decisions we make in the project should be driven by the business. So we want to understand, the business needs and make sure that we're designing things for the business. And so having that business representation, having that kind of steering committee is hugely important. And that's something that the sponsor of the project can do to go orchestrate that, bring those people together and really get that rolling.
Sam, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Yes, there was. So from our side, the most important aspect was just having a core group that was involved in the process throughout the whole life cycle of the process, right? We had 3 individuals, myself, Dave, and Maxine, who were essentially in on every aspect of the project, and at least one of us attended every single meeting that went on. So that includes the departmental meetings, that includes the developing of the infrastructure. Like every aspect was overseen, and not to an intrusive level, just to make sure that the goal, that the end product would have sort of a cohesive feel, and so that we could all be happy, and we could utilize the things that went well with the other groups in other areas. It was really key to our adoption and just our overall satisfaction with the end product.
Great. I think we have time for one more. So just if you have 1 minute, answer to this question. What did migration look like? How did you do migration?
Good question. So yeah, there's a couple different approaches we typically take to migration, and we typically look to leverage a combination. So one way that we make it easy to do large volumes of documents moving into SharePoint is through automated migration or scripting, and that's something Sam and the IT team at CPSM were instrumental in getting that organized and getting that run to automatically move documents in. But we always want to have a little bit of manual migration as well. So we want end users to sit down. We have these sessions we call migration parties. We do try and make them fun. We have music and snacks and that kind of thing. We want people to sit down and actually hand migrate some documents into SharePoint as a method to consolidate that training. Start to organize things, and maybe there's some things that need a little bit of thought or human intervention in that migration process. And so we want people to do that. One, it gets some work done, but also helps to consolidate the training and get their hands on the system.
Excellent. Thank you. So I think that's all we have time for today. Thank you everyone for joining. Really appreciate you taking the time today. Just as a couple of small things, if we can get this recording working, we'll send that out. Definitely send the slides out. And we have a blog post, if you want to just quickly go to the next slide there. If you're interested more in how Teams and SharePoint can work together, how they can be designed together, we have a bit more of a deeper dive on our blog, so you can check that out. So thank you again, everyone. Really appreciate it. I hope you have a great rest of the day.